I'm going to have to wake up my computer. It's such a privilege to be here, and it's amazing to see so many people at this conference. I think we should give a round of applause to all of you and to the organizers. I wonder what happened to my pointer, but oh, here it is. Okay, great. As I pointed out at the Sunstone Conference, Catholics also believe in the Holy Spirit. And I feel like the Holy Spirit has been sitting on my shoulder for the last 40 years in doing this work. It's very spiritually directed. I didn't choose to do it. This work chose me. I wanted to show you the Empirical foundation for our work with families for the Family Acceptance Project, because it's really, really important that people understand that everything that we're doing is really based on the lived experiences of many people like you, of families, of caregivers, of LGBT young people who are coming out these days at very, very early ages. One of the things people always want to know about is what's going on now. You know, people didn't come out at such young ages a long time ago. Well, we didn't have the internet a long time ago. The internet has really blown the closet door off of its hinges. It's dramatically changed the way that we have access to information. Images in the media are so much more positive than they were 3 decades ago, 2 or even 10 years ago. It's a very, very different time. The expansion of community support for LGBT young people is dramatic in terms of support programs in schools and in community settings, and more increasingly, faith-based programs. All of that has enabled young people to come out at ages that are normative for developing who they are. Historically, so many people never came out, or they came out in adulthood. That's not the case anymore, and we're really never going back to the way it was before. You're very familiar with so many of these serious health and social problems: suicide, homelessness, substance abuse, removal from the home, HIV, being separated from families. LGBT people historically are at much higher risk for a whole wide range of negative health and social problems, and that doesn't have to do with who they are. It has to do with how we relate to them and how people interact with them and perceive them. One of the really exciting things about the family intervention approach that we've been developing with our program is that we can prevent this. We can change it. And when people are struggling and families are in crisis, we can do something to make a difference about it. And that is really an incredible development and a really important change. When we started working on the Family Acceptance Project, which I started thinking about this in the 1990s, the focus on LGBT adolescents was really just on schools. Before we started this project, no one had studied what happens in families from the perspective of the whole family. They just asked adolescents about what their experiences were like, and that was what people perceived. They believed that families were unsupportive at best, toxic at worst, therefore families were rejecting, and there wasn't really anything that could be done about it. There was very, very little information about young people and faith communities. And all of these, families, faith, and schools, are cornerstones for how we socialize and nurture children and adolescents. As a result of these changes going back 4 decades when I started doing this work, we've emerged into the present with very few services for LGBT young people in the context of their families. Very few activities that reach out, especially to ethnically and religiously diverse families. The focus has been either on individual or peer-based services, and we have to change that because of the radically different ways that young people are learning about who they are today. In fact, we've known since the late 1980s that on average kids have their first crush at about age 10. They know who they like. They know whose poster they want to put up on the wall. They know who they want to give a Valentine to, even if the people around them say, oh no, Billy, you don't want to give it to Jose, you want to give a Valentine to Mary Jean. Billy knows who he wants to give that Valentine to. We've actually known since the 1990s that on average young people were coming out between ages 14 and 16. They were self-identifying as lesbian, gay, or bisexual. And in our work with the Family Acceptance Project, which is more recent and with younger adolescents from ages 13 to 18, we found that the average age of self-identifying was 13.4, and many, many young people knew who they were between ages 7 and 12. I get a phone call every week from all over the country. My child is 9, my son is 10, 11, 8. Where can we go? Where can we find a program? Where can we find services? And I'll have to say, I'm sorry, there really aren't any, because the impression in so many people's minds is you don't come out until adulthood, or maybe you don't come out until very, very late adolescence. Well, from years and years and years, young people have been coming out at young ages, but it hasn't really been recognized, and therefore services haven't been provided in the context of families, which is essential. You can't take a 9-year-old out of their family, or a 10-year-old, and have them create an alternative family. We have to support them in the context of their families, their culture, and their faith traditions. And that's really what our project is all about. People will say, well, how could this be? Sexual orientation, it's only about sex. Well, you know what? It's not only about sex. It's primarily about connectedness, human connectedness and relatedness, the kind of need that every one of us have to live in the context of relationships with others. And once we realize that, we understand how it can be possible for young people to know who they are at developmentally appropriate ages. And this is critical. It's not just unique to the Mormon world or the Catholics or the evangelicals or the atheists, for that matter. It's true all over the United States, and certainly in other countries as well, where we have to engage and involve families. And what more appropriate faith to start with in terms of bringing our research and our messages to a religious community and a religious social world than the Mormons. And actually, I have to say that it's been an extraordinary journey, Bob, with you and so many others of you here tonight, that, you know, the Montgomerys, who are just an extraordinary family, and others of you who I've come to know and to care about so deeply. You have such an amazing ability to be in relation to others, and such an amazing capacity, I think, to create welcoming congregations, which is actually an important finding of our research. So when we started this project, we started it not only to study and understand from a research perspective what happens in families, but to develop a whole new framework, to change how services are delivered, to change how school counselors and pediatricians and nurses and teachers and clergy and religious leaders understand about human development, and really to change public policy. Because when families are in conflict, the only thing we can do is to remove those kids from the home and put them in foster care, where within a matter of time, they're going to end up out on the street, and maybe 2% of them would have the opportunity to go on to college. That's not a solution. That's really the end of their future. So changing the frame has enormous implications, not just for what happens in the home, but what happens in society at large. So when we started this project, we wanted to understand not only what happens in families, but how do families express acceptance and rejection of their LGBT children, and how do those accepting and rejecting behaviors affect a whole range of health issues and well-being and their lives as young adults. So that's what we actually did with this research. It had never been done before in any country with any age, and as Bob said, there's enormous interest. We've trained in China, Latin America, and many other countries. We've actually been working with the whole Catholic school district. Can you imagine that has taken our research to develop a support program for LGBT students in elementary? They have junior high, or their schools go much different than ours do, into high school in general. I guess that's somebody up there giving me a hook. These are some of the more than 50 rejecting behaviors that we've identified in our research. And now what we can show with our research is how each one of these behaviors affects risk for HIV, suicide attempts, substance abuse, depression, self-esteem, sense of self-worth, well-being, general health. This is so exciting because we can show that restricting access to LGBT information, denial and refusing to believe that a youth is LGBT, telling them that it's a phase, you're just confused. That's done out of love by parents. It's done out of love by caregivers. They want to help their children fit in. They want to help them have a good life. They want them to be accepted by others. But what these parents don't understand is that those behaviors are shown by our research to be related to very high levels of risk. We've also shown that over 50 supportive behaviors, such as supporting their gender expression or standing up for them when others mistreat them because of who they are, believing that they can have a good life, helping your congregations become more supportive. These are behaviors that are linked with protecting against suicide, substance abuse, depression, building self-esteem, and most importantly, building overall health and sense of the future. So really the way parents talk, act, behave, caregivers, families, has a huge impact on not only the sense of self, but risk behaviors and wellness. We found that a lot of these rejecting behaviors are related to high levels of risk for HIV. For example, a more than 3 times greater likelihood of risk for HIV with a lot of those rejecting behaviors during adolescence, and that can be cut in half with moderate levels of rejection, or with suicide attempts, with a lot of those rejecting behaviors by the time someone is a young adult, can be more than 8 times as likely to try to take their own life at least once, and that can be cut dramatically by 3/4 by moderate levels of rejection. We found that with young people who come from families that are not at all accepting, about 60% of them are thinking of taking their own lives as a young adult. But just a little bit of acceptance, just a little bit of support. Honey, this is not, as you know, part of our faith, and we love you. We're going to be there for you, no matter what. You're our child, and we love you. Think about how remarkable that would be for so many young people in Utah and elsewhere who end up on the streets. Some of you in the experiences that you've had in the course of your lives. We can change that by helping families and caregivers understand how to support their LGBT children. So family acceptance actually boosts self-esteem. I was talking to a mom one day and she said, "What's a protective factor?" And I said, well, think of it like a vaccine. It's like inoculating your child with love to protect them against risk. And that's exactly what we're able to teach parents and caregivers, that rejection is linked with serious health and mental health problems, that family acceptance is protective and helps promote well-being. One of the most important things I think that we can do is change the future by changing the present. As Bob said, our family education booklets, they're on our webpage. You can download them free of charge. Thousands of people download them, and we have them in different languages, and we're always creating more. It's really great to be able to put that in a bishop's hand or in a stake president's hand or a Relief Society member or parents who desperately need this information. I know some parents for whom it made an extraordinary difference to be able to understand how to help their children, because that's what parents want to do. They don't want to hurt them, they want to help them. We've been developing all kinds of tools. You can't just publish a research paper, a lot of people do, and stick it in a fancy journal and it stays there, in that journal. You have to really put it into people's hands in terms of tools. So that's why we're developing the booklets, the videos. My aim really is to create a whole series of these videos that show the journey from struggle to support of ethnically and religiously diverse families with LGBT children. Families need role models. They need to understand what is acceptance. How do they help their child? What is important to their child? So with the video that you're going to see tonight, we're actually creating a discussion guide that will help Mormon families not only understand how to support their children, but how to help congregations become more welcoming, how to help schools and supportive communities. As Bob mentioned, our booklet, you'll find this, many people find this to be very ironic. Our booklets, and we have 4 of them now, are the first best practice resource for suicide prevention for LGBT young people in the National Best Practices Registry. But you'll probably find this ironic. Our Mormon booklet is the only faith-based best practice. in the whole registry for anything based on faith. And guess what? It happens to be for Mormon families with LGBT kids. Isn't that great? The videos are incredibly important. We have to give young people hope. The most important factor in preventing suicide is connectedness, helping them feel connected and giving them a sense of the future. And families need hope too. They need to understand that families from their background, their faith tradition, their culture, who speak their language, that they can support their LGBT children and help them understand how to do that as well. We use these in training. The film you're going to see tonight cost a lot more money because of the production and also making sure that it was a really authentic cultural experience for Mormon families. So I've put it in a number of festivals, and as soon as it's done with the festivals, we'll be able to disseminate it. I think I had some clipboards that we were going to pass around, Randall, for people to sign up if they want information about them or they want to learn more about how to participate. We have to humanize the lives of LGBT young people. We have to break the myths and misconceptions. That you have to be, that let's say there's the normative age of puberty for kids in general, maybe around 10, some are 11. And then for gay people, it's 25 or 30 or 50. That doesn't make any sense, does it? Of course not. But in doing this, we have to tell real stories. You know, I started doing this work in my heart many years ago. I started doing LGBT health in the 70s, and in 1980, I moved to Atlanta to do a clinical internship. And that was at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, and people said to me, you know how to start these programs. Help us start this community AIDS program. So I actually helped start the first community AIDS program in the South. And as a much younger social worker then, part of what I was doing was meeting the families who came in from little towns and communities across the whole South. Because then, and even today, so many people, young gay people, left their homes to try to live a more integrated life without shaming their families. And I would meet these families who would come in to sit at the bedside of their dying son and find out within a matter of minutes that they were gay and they were dying of AIDS. And while that was a devastating experience to witness that, I also saw something extraordinary. I saw the impact on the whole family. And very, very few people ever saw that. They saw the pain and the suffering of that young gay person who was excluded or rejected or left their family out of shame. But they never really saw the devastation of the whole family. And at that point, I think it planted the seed to do something different, to support families in a holistic way, to do it not just waiting until somebody comes out, but you know what, every single parent in our research, and we did all kinds of, lot of different kinds of studies, and we did our work in English, Spanish, and Chinese, and I think of this dad who was a day laborer, had a 4th grade education, didn't speak English, was a Chinese speaker, and he said, why isn't this information in every Chinese newspaper? Every Chinese parent needs to know how to help their child. Why didn't we learn this? Everybody said the nurses, the well baby care, the pediatrician should give us, our clergy should give us this information. And I encourage all of you tonight, as Bob said, to carry this information, to share it, to disseminate it, to help people in your work settings, in your wards and stakes, in your schools, and in your family and social network, understand that we can make a difference right now. We're creating the future by changing the present. And we can change the present. We can support our LGBT young people, even if we believe that being gay is wrong or being transgender is not normal. We can still love and support them. There are so many positive behaviors that parents can engage in, telling their children they'll always be there for them. So I want to show you an example, what I think is a very, very powerful example of how love in action happens when families step up and support their LGBT children. And I hope this is going to work. Can we turn the lights down?
had a plan set up in my head that when I went